From Washington, this is VOA News. I'm Tommy McNeil reporting. A suicide bomber struck a distribution center for Afghan voters' identification cards Sunday morning in Kabul, killing at least 48 people, wounding dozens others.
According to officials, most of them were waiting in line to receive identity cards.
After I heard a bang, I rushed to the site of the blast, and when I arrived at the scene, we helped many wounded people to carry them to the hospital. All the victims were women and children who were here to get their identity cards.
It's the most serious attack in Kabul since about 100 people were killed in January. Security remains a major problem ahead of upcoming elections.
That's Reuters' David Doyle reporting. A United Nations Relief and Works Agency spokesman says in Syria, the Assad regime continues to use aircraft and artillery to pound districts of the capital held by the Islamic State group. Homes and relief centers have been turned into death camps, and many areas are unsafe. Chris Guinness is calling for restraint and urges for the evacuation of the wounded.
We are urging all parties to this conflict to exercise maximum restraint, to spare civilian life, to make sure that civilian infrastructure is not unnecessarily hit. And of course, there must be safe passage for the sick and the wounded and the dying civilians, because it's important now that we spare civilian life. So we need to see maximum restraint and the evacuation of the wounded and civilians who wish to leave the combat zones.
Meanwhile, an international chemical weapons monitor group said that a team of inspectors did in fact collect samples on Saturday. This was at the site of an alleged gas attack that occurred 2 weeks ago in the Syrian town of Douma. And several former U.S. presidents were among the hundreds of mourners to pay their respects Saturday to former First Lady Barbara Bush. This is VOA News. Days after protests in Nicaragua over a Social Security overhaul, it's resulted in the deaths of at least 10 people, including a journalist reporting for Facebook. Some rights groups estimate the death toll since Wednesday, when the demonstrations began, is as high as 25.
Demonstrators have been protesting against planned Social Security reform since last week. Nicaraguan army troops have been deployed around the mayor's office in the capital, Managua, to protect those offices. The violent demonstrations were triggered by the new Social Security measures, which established an increase in contribution and a deduction of 5% from pensions. I'm Steve Norman, VOA News.
China said Sunday it welcomes the news that the U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is considering a trip to Beijing to talk about trade. China's Commerce Ministry said in a statement that the Chinese side has received information that the U.S. side hopes to come to Beijing to discuss economic and trade issues. China welcomes this. Mnuchin said that he discussed the possible trip and potential trade opportunities with the new head of China's central bank. Tensions have escalated between the U.S. and China over Beijing's attempts to challenge America's technological prowess, raising the prospects of a trade war that could hinder global economic growth. The UN Refugee Agency is appealing to armed groups in southern Libya to allow humanitarian access to thousands of people displaced by fighting to provide urgently needed relief.
Recent deadly clashes between armed groups in and around the southern Libyan city of Saba have forced an estimated 1,900 families, or more than 13,000 people, to flee their homes. UN refugee spokesman Andrei Mahecic says humanitarian help in this region of Libya is desperately needed.
The displaced Libyan population in the south badly needs adequate shelter and basic household items, including hygiene kits, sleeping mats, mattresses, and kitchen sets. To make matters worse, humanitarian access in this part of Libya has been restricted for weeks, and the situation remains extremely volatile. Many have sought refuge in local schools, hospitals, and other public buildings.
Libya has been riven by division and conflict since the 2011 Arab Spring uprising, which toppled former dictator Muammar Gaddafi.
That's Lisa Schlein reporting for VOA. Each year on April 22nd, many people stop to think about the health of the world environment, and like a New Year's Day for nature, many make Earth Day resolutions that they will treat the world around them more responsibly. This year's Earth Day focuses on getting rid of single-use plastics, promoting alternative materials, recycling, and developing more responsible behaviors concerning the use of plastics. I'm Tommy McNeil, VOA News.
That's the latest world news from VOA.